So let's start. The way I want to do it, cover these openings in alphabetical order. And I would like start with Alekhine Defense. And, well, let's start with the line for white. So E4, knight F6, that's the Alekhine Defense. And now, if we want to cover this opening for white, and what line would I recommend? Of course, we don't want to cover knight C3 move, second move, or D3 move, or some kind of F3 move. Or there is also bishop C4 move. Those are not the moves I would recommend. What I would recommend to go the main line, which is pawn E5, knight to D5, and pawn to D4. And here, only two moves for black that make any sense. Those are pawn D6 or knight to B6. Now, the line I recommend you to play, for the line I recommend to play for white here, this move order does not make any difference, because the reason sometimes they don't play D6, they prefer to play knight B6 first, it's to eliminate some variation like bishop C4 or some gambit lines. So, but if you play on D6 or knight B6, C4, then only move that will make any sense here for black, if they play the knight B6 and we go C4, they have to go D6. And if they go D6 first, then after C4, they go knight B6, which is 100% transposition and identical positions. So what white will do here, will play E takes D, and obviously taking with the queen is not a good idea for black, because white will go C5, and now in order not to lose a piece, black has to go queen E6 check, then white goes bishop E2, and after knight D5 and knight F3, white is way ahead in development, and queen on E6 makes no sense at all. So only captures that will make any sense here for black are E takes D and C takes D. So let's start with E takes D. Now, there are several ways for white to continue developing in this position. There is move knight C3, which is most popular move, bishop E7, and one of the ways for white to play is bishop E3 and continue queen F3. It's one of the newer continuations, which is okay, but line I want to recommend is the easiest line and quickest line to learn, as I think you will feel most comfortable using it. Bishop D3, after bishop E7, black castles, white plays knight E2, and suppose black plays knight C6. Now, here we have to concentrate on a couple of things. We have to keep an eye on our C4 pawn. Now, C4 pawn is very important to know that C4 pawn may be a target. For example, if white plays castle here, which we can do, now black may play knight B4. And black is attacking D3 bishop, so black wants to play knight takes D3, which will make their life a lot easier. But knight takes D3 they don't play, because white plays bishop B1. Now, after white plays bishop to B1, black cannot play knight takes C4, because then white wins after A3 move, attacking the B4 knight and when before knight moves either c6 to a6 square, after queen to d3, you see the double attack attacking knight on c4 and pawn on h7. White simply wins a minor piece in the game. So this is very important to know. In some cases, this knight b4 may be a threat. For example, bishop f6, black may play bishop f6, and now black may be attacking our d4 pawn. Now black is so-called threatening. Maybe they are not threatening, but they're intending to play knight takes d4. And now bishop e3 move is a serious mistake, because on bishop e3, black can play knight b4. And after bishop b1, they will play knight takes c4. And now a3 move is not nearly as effective. After knight takes e3 and pawn takes e3, knight simply moves back to c6, and black has an extra pawn for no visible compensation. So that means we still have to keep an eye on our c4 pawn, and meanwhile d4 pawn is hanging. So what we have to play here, the reasonably good move, is simply pawn to b3, and if black tries to play knight takes d4, knight takes d4, and bishop takes d4, white has an advantage after bishop takes h7, king takes h7, and queen takes to d4. This is better position for white, and quick overview of this position. White's king is safer. White has a better minor piece. Bishop on c1, after it will be developed on b2, is very powerful, and white has more space. Obviously, we cannot go in detailed analysis over this position, but this position, in this position, white has clear advantage. So now going back here, now there are a couple of other subtleties in this position. For instance, instead of playing bishop f6 in this position, black may go bishop g4. Now white goes f3, and now black may go bishop h5. Now how do we play this? We go again b3. Now we are ready for knight b4, bishop b1, because pawn on c4 is not going to be hanging. And what white's plan is, eventually they're going to go d5, and after knight e5, bishop will go to c2, and white has comfortable space advantage and a better game. Now let's look at some tricky ways for black to prevent white from stabilizing their position and getting a space advantage. There are some tricky ways for black to play. e4, knight f6, let's quickly get to the position. d4, knight d5, knight d5, d4, d6, c4, knight b6, ed, ed. Knight c3, bishop e7, bishop d3, and here they can play knight c6 first. Now we will go knight e2, and here also knight b4 does not do much, does not do anything, because after bishop b1, black cannot play knight takes c4 because of queen to a4 check, winning a piece. But the tricky move order for black here is to play bishop to g4. Now this bishop is pinning the knight on e2, and obviously white cannot castle now because knight takes d4. So what white should do here, they should play f3. And now black may play bishop h4 check. And you see that white is in check, We don't want to go g3 because bishop takes f3 and white is in trouble because rook is hanging, and after rook f1 or even castle, black simply plays bishop takes e2, queen takes e2, and bishop e7, where white does not have any compensation for missing pawn. So the correct way to play after bishop h4 check, this should not be discouraging for you to play king f1. That's a good move. Now, after bishop goes to h5, let's see what happened to this position. We have king on f1. That's true. Well, we rather have a king castled. But what does black have? Black has bishop on h4, which is mildly put, it's kind of stupid piece. And bishop on h5 doesn't do much either. So this bishop on h4 has to come back eventually. And how far is white from castling? They are not going to literally castle, but they can castle by hand, eventually by playing g3 and king g2. So meanwhile, let's try to complete development for black. If they castle, what can we do here? We can go b3, and eventually white is going to go bishop e3, queen d2, and g3 and king f2 or king g2. White is still gonna have the same advantage in space, and black is gonna have some dysfunctional pieces. Like both bishops are dysfunctional, and those knights, especially one on b6, is really needs a lot of improvement here. So this position is also okay for white. Now, this is if black recaptures ED. Now, the other recapture, that's the line I would recommend. And if you prefer some different lines, okay, you can pick them up from some of the opening books. That's not necessarily, I want to say, that's not necessarily the best line, but this is comfortable line. That's one I use, and I would recommend you to play. Now, the other continuation is after e5, d5, d4, d6, c4, knight, b6, e takes d, c takes d. Now here, this position is very well known, and its age is old. So white should go knight c3. This is the main move here. g6, that's how black should play. Now bishop e3. That's not the only way to play. That's not maybe even the main variation here. But that's the one I would choose every time I play against Alekhine Defense. And I had good results, and I have great confidence in it. If I want to recommend to play any line, that's the one it will be. So bishop g7, rook to c1, castle, and pawn to b3. Now, this is a typical position for CD recapture. Now, there are two main moves. One is e5 for black, and the other one is knight c6. I'm quite confident that white has advantage in both continuations. Well, let's start with the knight c6. We should play d5, knight to e5, and now let's analyze this position. White is slightly behind in development, but as you can see, position is not open. The advantage white has in this position is in a pawn structure and absolutely bad piece, knight on b6. This is always problem for black. Now, what black did when you make first three moves with the same piece, like knight f6, knight d5, and knight b6, either first three moves or first 3 out of 4 with the same piece, and piece ends up on b6. This is not the way is recommended to play game of chess. But when knight ends up on b6 and it's totally smothered with white's pawn structure and totally restricted, this position cannot be good for black. So I would simply recommend bishop e2, and no matter what black does here, knight f3 next move. People have played against me f5 and after knight f3, f4, but you simply go bishop d4 and you castle later and you put your rook on e1, and there is, no matter what black does, you gonna make this happen. You're gonna castle, you're gonna put your rook on e1. Eventually, black's pieces gonna experience serious problem, and advantage and controlling e file for white and backward e7 pawn is going to take their toll. So this position is simply, if black plays knight c6, is simply not good. After d5, knight e5, and bishop e2, followed by knight f3. Actually, there was a game played by Anatoly Karpov, and after f5 that was played, I like knight f3 move. And Anatoly Karpov, actually I covered this game in my previous Roman Slav series. Karpov has played f4, and after knight g4 played bishop takes g4, f takes g, and knight e2, which is also very good for white. And then again, if I had to give my personal recommendation, I would prefer bishop e2. But I'm sure you're going to take Karpov's recommendation, so I still have to say what I think is best. So bishop e2. So move was played by black in this. Another move that can be played by black in this position is e5. So black is trying here to open position quickly before white's king side is developed, and then they try to discomfort white this way. So d takes e, and d takes e. And now there are two moves for white. White must play c5, so they can play c5 right away, or they can play queen takes d8, rook takes d8, and then c5. This continuation after exchange queens and c5 happened in my game against Lev Albert in US Championship. I got a very big advantage after the opening. So what would I recommend here? You go ahead and you can explore c5, and this is a good position. But my recommendation is queen takes d8, rook takes d8, c5, forcing knight to d7. That's the only move, since after knight d5 and rook d1, black simply loses the game right away, because on bishop e6, bishop c4, and pin on d file is decisive. So after knight d7, white can play bishop c4, and after knight c6, knight f3, then they castle and they have sizable advantage. So there is a threat of knight g5 also has to be considered, and black is not very comfortable here. So on knight a5, possible bishop d5, and white has an advantage in every variation here. This is what I would recommend to play with white against Alekhine Defense. Well, this was covered, Alekhine Defense, I think, was covered just a little wider than this in my preferred opening repertoires. So what I can say here is that one of the lines that I recommend gives white some advantage, may not be the best, it may not be the best line, but it's a very comfortable, you can feel very comfortable playing it and achieving position you want. Now let's try to look at some positions. What can I recommend if you really like to play Alekhine Defense? And what I can recommend is this. After e4, knight f6, here now we have to cover other moves than e5. Because if we are black and we play knight f6, we can't control what white is going to play. They may go knight c3, which is one of the possible moves, and they may go bishop c4. That's another move. Now, well, neither one of those moves gives an advantage, but we have to cover it. Now, if you play, if I had to recommend to build the opening repertoire, would I recommend Alekhine Defense? No, I would not, because I don't think it's 100% sound opening, but it does not have clearly defective sides. So, so if you don't already adopted Alekhine Defense, don't start now. But if you played and you really like it and you want to go on with this, for those I would recommend a couple of lines that may be in your interest. So after e4, knight f6, knight c3, suppose. This is one of the less popular moves, and I can recommend d5. Now, obviously, if white just takes on d5, they cannot count on getting any real advantage. Knight takes d5, and now if they go bishop c4, you can play knight b6 line, and after bishop c4, knight c6. You're going to have comfortable position. It's not anything white would want to play. Or after e5, which is the only move that it's kind of, if white wants to challenge black in the opening, then it's e5. Now, two moves that I think are equally good in this position. Two moves. One of them is d4, and the other is knight e4. Knight e4 move that I would prefer. And I have had this position. I have had this position many times for black. Now, how can I have this position if I never play Alekhine Defense? I never played Alekhine Defense, but I had this position many times with black. The way it happened is I do play, and I have played in past, center counter opening. And after e4, d5, white may go knight c3, and then when I go knight f6 and they play e5, I go knight e4. So that's how I may get it. It's a transposition. And here, only move for white where they can contest black in the open, they can be really ambitious, is knight c3 to e2. Because that's when black's knight on e4 may feel uncomfortable. What they want to do, they want to go d4 and then either gain a lot of tempos on e4 knight, or just simply maybe you want to win it. So the move I would recommend after knight e2 is d4, and I think black is perfectly comfortable here. After d3, they can go knight c5. Knight did make 3 moves and ended up on c5, but as you can tell, it did not affect black's development, because white made 2 moves with b1 knight to c3 and e2 and put it on in a position where it blocks other white pieces. And next, black is going to go knight c6, or develop bishop on f5, or even pawn g6, bishop g7, and delay development of a light square bishop, maybe try to put later on b7. So black is very comfortable here. And now quickly, we don't want to pay too much attention to this opening after e5, d4. This is also okay continuation for black, because e takes f, c takes d, and now the main move is f takes g, of course, because f takes e does not really get them anywhere. After c takes d, we have almost symmetrical position. White is going to take on d2, black is going to take on e7. There is a zero advantage for white. So, and if white plays f takes g, black plays c takes d, the best way to take is with a queen. And after exchange of queens, and black takes on g7 and white castles long, black has absolutely no problem. They can go knight c6, bishop d7, castle long, or even castle short. There is no advantage for white at all. So those side lines, only way you can attempt to get any advantage at all in Alekhine defense for white, that you have to play e5 on a second move. And that's why I recommend e5 for white. So we should expect that your opponent is going to play e5, knight d5, and some lines here. Well, here white has wide range of possibilities. There are lines with d4, which is the main continuation. There are some lines with c4, knight b6, d4, and all kinds of continuations like this. So we have to start them in any order, and we might as well start it in a random order. Let's cover the c4 move. c4, knight b6, obviously we don't want to cover c4 with next move d4, because then we're going to get to the main variation. So we don't want to look at this. So what I want to look at is what happens if white plays either c5 or d4 followed by f4, which is a four-pawn attack or four-pawn variation, whatever you want to call it. So let's start with the c5 move. Knight d5, and now there is a good news and bad news for white. White has advanced pawns that may discomfort black's development, but on the other hand, those pawns may become targets. So let's see what can happen. Bishop c4, knight c3. On the bishop c4, you can go this. On the bishop c4, you can go e6 or c6. c6 is okay move, good move. Knight c3. And again, and here you should go d6. Now this is all opening theory. Winning this pawn for white right now is not recommended, because knight takes d5, c takes d5, and bishop takes d5. This is a good position for black. They can go de, or they can go e6 following by de. So the only problem white may try to create is by playing queen b3. And now if we take dc or de, they're going to take on d5, and they may get some advantage. But on queen b3, the best move here for black, simply playing knight d7, and now no matter what white does, black has very good game. Actually was previously analyzed in one of my very earliest first tapes. This position was interestingly analyzed as a good position for white, but it wasn't quite so. As we know, a lot of books and tapes and all analysis, chess analysis, have corrections, have mistakes, and believe it or not, mine have also mistakes, some of them, and I confess. So the way it may go here is knight takes d5, knight takes c5, knight c7 check, queen takes c7, bishop takes f7, and simply king d8. This is a good position for black. Now, you can spend some time. We don't want to go into big details. This is a really, really bad position for white. Next, now queen is hanging on b3, and you can go g6, bishop g7, or even maybe try to lock out the f7 bishop. White is not doing well here. The other little danger in c4, actually also covered in one of my previous tapes, e4 knight f6, e5 knight d5, c4 knight b6, c5 knight d5. It's knight c3 move. Now a knight c3 move, what I think you can do easiest way is knight takes c3, d takes c, and now you could go d6 or you could go e6. Move I would recommend is e6. Now the story with d6 is black has queen b3 move. You could go d6 also, it's not bad. Now, very importantly, don't think that someone is giving you e-pawn for free, because that's all you have to do now, to take on e5, on e5, and you are almost lost. The move is bishop g5, and we don't want to spend too much time on this position. This is real bad for black. Now the threat is simply rook d1, and only move black has, believe it or not, is a queen d7. Any other move loses on the spot. Quickly we review these possibilities. Now if there is h6, then after rook d1, attacking queen, and knight d7 or bishop d7, and now we go bishop c4, the game is over. There is no defense to bishop takes f7 checkmate, because after e6, black simply loses the queen. So the only move is queen d7, because move like f6 also loses for some clever reason. Rook d1, now knight d7, of course not bishop d7 because queen takes b7. So, and after knight d7, white has absolutely crushing move. Bishop c4 is not as effective because black may play e6, and after bishop e6, queen e7. Position is very unclear because bishop on g5 is hanging and knight takes c5 is coming. However, after f6, queen e6, black has to resign right away because there is no defense to bishop c4 move. So that's as much as you know. So you don't fall for this, and be wise enough to play simply knight c6 here, and you are comfortable, or play e6, which is also okay. Now on bishop e6 or even knight c6, that's even more accurate move. After bishop e4, now e6, and if white plays bishop d3, you can simply take on c5, and the key idea for white to sacrifice this pawn is to try to play queen g4, attacking g7 pawn. And you see now you cannot go f6. f6 is bad because e takes f, g takes f, and then, no, not e takes f, yeah, e takes f, that's correct. And after queen takes f6, I don't know, maybe queen h5 check and taking the bishop, or maybe take c7 pawn, or after f6, simply queen h5 check puts them in very difficult position. So after queen g4, you cannot go rook g8, you cannot, g6 creates a lot of weaknesses in dark squares, and you cannot castle because of bishop h6. So what can you do here? g5 is a very strong move, and black has a great position. Bishop takes g5, then rook g8. And you see now when white takes the queen, black is going to take the queen. You see bishop on d8 is hanging and pawn on g2 is hanging. White is simply in trouble here. And pawn on e5 is hanging. So that's a little too much. And that's not a very good position for black to play. So for white to play, to take it back. No, so after knight c6, you have a very good position. So c4 and c5 was popular many years ago, but it's not anymore. So let's cover a little bit the continuation with c4, knight b6, d4, d6, f4. Now there are several ways to play this position. The main variation and critical position of this opening is d takes e, f takes e, and now if black goes knight c6, white goes knight f3, and black can go bishop f5 or bishop g4, and after bishop e2, e6, and knight c3 or bishop e3, then bishop e7, bishop e3, and basically we're going to get the position that is not so bad for black. There were a lot of games played with it. You should go ahead and look at them, and result is very satisfactory for black. There were some very sharp positions played by Yugoslavian GM Ljubojevic and also by David Bronstein. They won some nice games for white, but theory has changed since then because it was many years ago, and you can hardly find any reasonably strong player who would play four-pawn variation. That's not a danger for black at all. e5, knight d5, d4. Now after d4, d4, d6, there is continuation knight f3. Now this is the main continuation, as I mentioned. Another continuation is c4. One we covered for black. Now, if you play this, what do you do? How do you play this position here? You go knight b6, and they play against you e takes d. Now, when I said after e takes d, white has some advantage, yeah, white is entitled to have some advantage, but positions here are very, very playable. Now, let me give you a few hints for black. What you do here, suppose white plays just the way I recommended you to play with white. Knight c3, bishop e7, bishop d3, we castle, he goes knight e2, we go knight c6, and white castles. We just covered this position. So what can you do here? Now develop your bishop on c8. Go bishop g4. After f3, you have to retreat it to h5. Now if white goes bishop e3, bishop e3 is not a good move, we know, because of knight b4. And now when bishop moves, actually it's not knight b4, since white can simply move bishop b1. The move you should be aware of and it's a good move in this position, is d5. Now remember, this idea, I recommend you to play d5 in this position. Only, d5 is only good when you don't have your bishop on c8. Never play d5 in these positions, in those type of positions, if your bishop is still on c8, and here is why. On d5, only sensible way for white to play is c5, obviously. Now, if you have to go with knight on d7, that's not good. First of all, knight takes d5 there, and knight from d7 has no future at all. Going to f6, it will block black's dark square bishop. Black is going to have cramped position to the rest of the game. The idea why you needed your bishop out from c8, that after c5, you may play knight to c8. Now, this is a good position for the knight. What you want to do later, to play bishop g6, bishop f6, and continue knight to e7 and knight to f5. This way you may slowly establish some pressure on white's d4 pawn. And that's the plan that you have to adapt, and that's the plan to play. If you have to play against this system, that's the way you want to play. The main variation on move 4 in this position for white is knight f3. Now, and we know that there are moves g6, bishop g4, and c6. Those are the only moves that black can play. Now, if I had to recommend you to do something, I wouldn't recommend to play Alekhine, but if I had to recommend one of the lines in there, I would go with bishop g4, bishop e2, or pawn c4, which is almost a transposition, bishop e2, e6, pawn c4, knight to b6. Now castle for white, bishop e7, knight c3, and we just castle. Now, what is the idea here for black? What is it? Black wants at some point maybe exchange the deep pawns or even push d5. And you see they put the light square bishop on g4 behind their pawn structure, so they don't have really passive pieces. Actually, what they want mostly is to put a lot of pressure, the main idea, to put a lot of pressure in the center by playing knight c6, at some point take on f3, and probably capture on e5. So in this position, it's black's move, and white's move. White plays bishop e3. Suppose white plays bishop e3, and black goes knight c6. You see, this position is okay for black because black is already putting pressure on e5, and black is indirectly, directly maybe, threatening bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3, and d takes e, or maybe even knight takes c4. So white has some problems with protecting c-pawn. Now, if they play ed, then we capture cd, and we go d5 maybe next move. Or c4 pawn is still hanging. And on b3 move, a good idea, just like in the variation we looked at a few minutes ago, the good idea is to play d5, and after c5, go knight c8. Exact same plan. Bishop f6, later capturing the knight on f3, then playing knight c6 to e7, c8 to e7, and e7 to f5. Try to put maximum pressure on d4 pawn and restrict white's activity that way. And then later maybe try to create play an attack of pawn minority attack on the queen side. So that's the idea. And if black, after ED and CD, tries to play D5, then white plays D5, then black simply captures ED, and now knight takes D5 does nothing for white because black simply plays knight takes D5, and after queen takes D5, bishop E6, and black is very comfortable. So if white recaptures on D5 with a pawn, then black can be comfortable a couple of different ways. One of the ways is bishop takes F3, bishop takes F3 and go knight E5, and after bishop E2 go rook C8 and queen A5. Black is at least okay, so they can go knight C4 next, and they have no problems at all. You have to be a little careful with your A7 pawn, but you don't have to. You can play A6 first and then rook C8. Black is doing fine here. So this is kind of little guideline for you, what I would recommend. That's not complete analysis of this system. Now, that's the system I would recommend you to play, and now you have to do a lot of research on your own. Actually, not a lot of research, is possibly just get some information of the basic strategical ideas. That those are the lines I will give you, that they contain no danger, and you have the plan. This is the most you can get from the opening. You need to have a plan in every opening. You need to know what your basic idea is. You know what are you aiming for. Then you are likely to be okay in the opening. There's one other line I want to attract your attention to. E5, knight D5, knight C3. Knight takes C3, and this position can be played a couple of different ways for white, and you guess what couple of ways are. One is B takes C, and the other is D takes C. Let's quickly look at both of those continuations. On B takes C, what we would do, we would go D6 or D5, but D6 is fine, F4. Now you may want to go G6, knight F3, bishop G7, quick development, D4, castle, and now whatever white played, bishop C4 or bishop D3, it doesn't really make difference. What should black do here? Black should, as soon as possible, attack white's center, and they have to do it right away. Now, I would not recommend to play D takes E, because then you're going to have a big problem attacking white's center, because white is going to play D takes E. And doubled C pawn does not make any difference, because white has sizable space advantage. So what would I recommend? To go bishop G4. Now, this is one of the ways to put more pressure on the center, because you see the knight kind of overlooks this pawn structure. It kind of protects it. So you are targeting the knight. And after castle, you may go C5. Your plan is to go knight C6 and put maximum pressure on these pawns. Just spend some time on this position, and you will see that white will have problems maintaining this pawn center. I had a lot of problems with it. I used to play this position, and I gave it up. That's not a good way to play for white. And quickly, we're going to cover capturing with a D pawn. On move 4, after E4, knight F6, E5, knight D5, knight C3, knight takes C3, capturing with a D pawn. Then you can go d6 or d5. They are both okay. d6, and if white goes bishop c4, be careful not to lose your queen after de. Bishop takes f7. But simply you can go even e6 or knight c6, and white has absolutely no advantage here. After ed, you can simply go ed, or the other continuation, instead of bishop c4, they may play bishop f4, and you can still go knight c6, bishop b5, bishop d7. Still white has no advantage. No advantage. It's very simple, very clear, and very safe. So if you want to play, this is like a quick ideas if you play Alekhine for black, if you have to play. Remember, you play this opening only if you really feel like playing, and if you are not playing it, don't start now. So that will complete our overview on Alekhine defense for white and for black.